On March 11, 2026, after more than 12 years on death row, Cedric Allen Ricks was executed by lethal injection for the murders of his girlfriend and her 8-year-old son. But what most people don't know is that the day before the killings, Cedric had been in a Tarrant County courtroom facing assault charges for strangling that same girlfriend 6 months earlier. He knew the charges were going to stick this time. He knew the relationship was over. And 24 hours later, Roxann Sanchez and her son Anthony were dead on the living room floor, stabbed repeatedly while her 2 other children watched. One of those children, 12-year-old Marcus, survived 25 stab wounds by imitating the sound of his little brother dying. This is what happened. Shortly after 7 p.m. on May 1, 2013, 30-year-old Roxann Sanchez and her 3 sons arrived home from the grocery store at the Colonial Village Apartments in Bedford, Texas. She carried her 9-month-old baby Isaiah and some of the bags upstairs to their 3rd-floor apartment, while her 2 older boys, 12-year-old Marcus and 8-year-old Anthony, went to their bedroom to play. Roxann started cooking dinner. Living with them was Roxann's boyfriend, 38-year-old Cedric Ricks, who was also Isaiah's father, while Marcus and Anthony were Roxann's children from a previous relationship. Between 7:10 and 7:20 that evening, a neighbor walking through the stairwell heard Cedric screaming, "Don't have me come down here and waste my mother time on this bull." But when the neighbor passed the couple on the stairs, Cedric went quiet. Roxann was carrying 2 bags of groceries and looked distraught. While the boys remained in their bedroom, Cedric and Roxann continued their argument in the apartment, and soon the yelling escalated into screaming. When Marcus and Anthony ran to the living room to see what was happening, they found Cedric and Roxann hitting each other. Then, Cedric pushed Roxann to the floor. The boys tried to get between them to break up the fight, but Cedric shoved Marcus down and kept punching Roxann. Then he walked to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and pulled out a knife. And what started as a fist fight was about to become something much worse. Cedric began stabbing Roxann repeatedly as she tried to protect herself, but it wasn't enough. Marcus ran to his bedroom closet and tried to call police, but Cedric followed him and ripped the closet door open. Marcus dropped the phone, and in an effort to protect himself, he grabbed the blade of the knife to try to stop Cedric, but it sliced deep into his hand. Cedric chased Marcus back into the living room. Anthony was standing next to the couch with blood on his face, begging Marcus to get help. But before either boy could escape, Cedric pushed Marcus face down on the ground, held his head with one hand, and stabbed him repeatedly in the back of the neck. Then, Cedric shoved Anthony to the floor next to his brother. And while Marcus watched, unable to move, Cedric stabbed Anthony over and over until he made a gurgling noise and went still. When Marcus tried to get up, Cedric pinned him down and started stabbing him again. Marcus knew he had to do something, so he copied the gurgling noise Anthony had just made, the sound of his brother's final breaths. And it worked. Cedric stopped. Cedric walked to the kitchen, placed the knife in the sink, and washed his hands. Then he walked to the master bedroom and took a shower. After drying off, he made a phone call, packed his clothes, placed baby Isaiah in his crib, and left the apartment. He took Roxann's car and simply drove away. Marcus stayed on the floor, bleeding badly from dozens of wounds, too terrified to move in case Cedric came back. So he lay there next to the bodies of his mother and his brother until he was sure Cedric was gone. Then he looked out the window, saw that the car was missing, and called 911. "My mom's boyfriend killed my mom and my other brother," he told the operator. "He stabbed them. He took my mom's car and left." Officer Clayton Baxley arrived first and could hear a baby screaming inside. When backup arrived and the officers opened the door, Marcus came through it covered in blood from head to toe. The back of his head, neck, and shoulders were so badly lacerated that he was bleeding through his clothes. He was in shock and couldn't sit down. Inside the apartment, officers found Roxann and Anthony lying on the floor surrounded by massive amounts of blood. They found baby Isaiah crying in a crib in the back bedroom and he appeared unharmed. Marcus was airlifted to Cook Children's Medical Center. He had lost over 40% of his blood. Doctors found 3 separate stab wounds to his head, one of which had penetrated bone, and he had 9 wounds to the back of his neck. He underwent a 6-hour surgery to close his wounds, followed by a second surgery that lasted another 2 hours. Without immediate medical intervention, Marcus would have died. But he survived and would later testify against the man who tried to kill him. Roxann Sanchez and Anthony Figueroa were pronounced dead at the scene, and autopsies would later reveal the extent of the brutality. Roxann had suffered an instantly fatal stab wound that severed her spinal column at the brainstem, and a second stab wound cut through her right carotid artery. She also had defensive wounds on her hands, evidence of blunt force trauma to her head, and signs of manual strangulation. Anthony had been stabbed over 40 times. One wound penetrated his skull into his brain, and another cut through his jugular vein and pierced his larynx. Roxann had worked as a medical assistant and was known by everyone around her as a devoted mother. Her brother Chris told reporters, no matter how hard of a time Roxann was going through, she always had a smile and helped somebody else. He said the boys were always laughing and smiling, and he called them Mama's boys because of how close they were to their mother. Roxann's best friend of 18 years, Amanda Gomez, said, "She loved her children more than anything and would do anything for them. You can look into their eyes and see her." That was the woman Cedric left dead on the living room floor. And while her family was about to get the worst phone call of their lives, Cedric was already making one of his own. After leaving the apartment, Cedric called his cousin Tamara Butts in Mansfield, Texas. "I did something bad," he told her, and when he spoke to Tamara's father, he was more direct. "I messed up," he said. "I killed Roxann and the boys." He asked them to go get Isaiah from the apartment, and when Tamara urged him to turn himself in, Cedric told her he would die before he ever went to jail. But Tamara immediately called 911 and gave police Cedric's phone number. She kept texting him to help officers track his location. And using a cell phone ping through Sprint, Detective Joey Gager determined Cedric was heading north on Interstate 35 through Oklahoma. Around 10:30 p.m., Oklahoma State Troopers spotted Roxann's silver Nissan Altima at a gas station off I-35 near Ardmore. They confirmed the plate number with Bedford police and pulled Cedric over. He stopped immediately and didn't resist. He was taken into custody and transported to the Garvin County Detention Center. A jailer warned him not to tell anyone why he was there, but Cedric told his cellmates anyway, and they beat him for it. At midnight, a judge in Texas signed arrest warrants for the murders of Roxann and Anthony and the attempted murder of Marcus. But there's something about this case that makes the events of May 1st even harder to process, because what happened that night didn't come out of nowhere. It was the end of a pattern that stretched back years and across multiple women. Cedric had been arrested for domestic violence 5 or 6 times before this. He couldn't even remember exactly how many. He had also been arrested multiple times for violating protective orders and 5 times for resisting arrest. His ex-wife, Tashana Singleton, testified at trial that Cedric once choked her unconscious outside a police station, and when she gave birth to his son, Cedric looked at the baby and said, "I hope it dies." Then came Roxann. 6 months before the murders in November 2012, Roxann showed up at the emergency room at Texas Health Harris Methodist in Bedford. The triage nurse asked her what brought her in. Roxann told her she had been strangled until she lost consciousness and that her head had been pounded against the floor. She rated her pain a 10 out of 10. The nurse categorized her as a priority trauma patient. An emergency protective order was issued, and Cedric was barred from going near Roxann, the boys, their school, her workplace, and her mother's house. But that protective order expired in January 2013, and Roxann eventually went back to him. And remember that Cedric had been in court the day before the murders? Here's why that matters. On April 30th, 2013, Cedric appeared before a judge on the pending assault charges from that November strangulation. and he later admitted that he knew he wasn't going to get out of those charges like he had before. He and Roxann were also in the process of splitting up. So the argument over groceries on May 1st wasn't a random explosion. It was the final act of a man who knew the relationship was ending, the legal system was closing in, and this time there would be consequences. At trial in May 2014, Marcus Figueroa took the stand and described what happened that night. He told the jury how Cedric held his head down with one hand and stabbed him with the other, how he didn't say a word while he did it, and how Marcus copied the dying sounds of his younger brother to make Cedric think he was dead. The jury needed only 45 minutes to convict Cedric of capital murder, and during the sentencing phase, the defense presented something that had never been used in a Texas criminal case before. During sentencing, they brought in a neuroscience researcher who testified that Cedric's brain was literally built for aggression. Every brain scan they used showed he went into sensory overload during arguments and couldn't control his impulses. His mother, Helen Ricks, also testified. "We tried everything we could to help him," she said. "We tried whipping him, we went to counselors, we did what we could. We never thought we would be in a position like this." But then Cedric himself took the stand. He claimed he was acting in self-defense, that the whole house had ganged up on him and he feared for his life. A 38-year-old man with a history of domestic violence, claiming self-defense against a woman and her 2 children. Then, instead of fighting for his life, he told the jury he wanted to die. "It's irrelevant what happened that night," he said. "The jury made a decision to convict me on the facts that were presented." After roughly 7 hours, the jury recommended the death penalty. And on May 29, 2014, Cedric Allen Ricks was formally sentenced to death. What do you think? Should Cedric have gotten the death penalty for this crime, or life in prison instead? For the next 12 years, Cedric sat on death row at the Allen B. Polunsky Unit, the facility that houses all of Texas's male death row inmates. During that time, Cedric underwent what many described as a spiritual transformation. He became a devout Christian and began writing letters to supporters around the world. And in one letter to a supporter in Italy, he wrote about watching the Olympics and being moved by the opening ceremony. He signed off with, "I love you. Keep me in your deepest prayers. Solidarity in Christ and friendship. With affection, Cedric." But the courts weren't moved. Cedric had confessed to the crimes and exhausted his appeals relatively quickly. On November 4, 2024, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals rejected his final appeal, in which he had asked for his death sentence to be commuted to life in prison. Advocacy groups launched clemency campaigns. The community of Sant'Egidio argued that Cedric's transformation was genuine and that his life should be spared. Petitions circulated. Vigils were planned outside the Huntsville Unit. But Texas had no intention of stopping the execution. And for Marcus Figueroa, now in his mid-20s, there was no redemption. He had watched his mother and brother die. He had been stabbed 25 times and forced to pretend to be dead to survive. The trauma of that night would follow him forever. In October 2025, during National Domestic Violence Awareness Month, the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office announced the execution date. On March 11, 2026, Cedric's final day came. If you're wondering what Cedric's last meal was, here's the thing. Texas doesn't do last meals. Not anymore. That ended in 2011 after a death row inmate ordered a huge spread of food and then refused to eat a single bite. Since then, every inmate in Texas just gets whatever the rest of the prison is eating that day. And Cedric was no different. Cedric arrived at the Huntsville Unit around midday. Prison officials said he was quiet. He turned down the chance to speak with his attorney. The one thing he did ask for was a necklace with a cross on it, the same one he had worn on death row. He put it on. Prison records list Cedric as Jewish, but he declined to have a spiritual advisor present. Inside the chamber, Cedric was strapped to a gurney. IV lines were inserted into both arms. On the other side of a glass window, 7 of his victims' relatives watched. And standing just steps from the gurney, looking through the glass, was Marcus Figueroa. On the back of his neck, visible above his shirt collar and below his hair, were several scars from that night. He showed no emotion. When the warden asked Cedric if he had a final statement, he spoke. "I want to say that I'm sorry for taking Roxann and Anthony from y'all," he said. "I'm glad to be able to speak to tell y'all that face to face." He said he hoped that one day his victims' relatives would find it in their hearts to forgive him. Then he turned his words to Marcus. "I always thought about you, and I'm sorry that I took your mom and your brother away. I hate that you had to experience that. I just can't imagine. But I'm truly sorry for what I've done, and I wish y'all peace and joy as much as you can, but I'm sorry. That's all I can say." His voice cracked. A tear formed in his eye. He said he hoped to find Roxann and Anthony in heaven and tell them he was sorry face to face. "I hope y'all go in peace. I really do. I'm sorry," he concluded. Then the lethal dose of pentobarbital began to flow. Cedric took 19 quick breaths. Then he made 10 snoring sounds. Seconds later, a few intermittent gurgles, and then all movement and all sound stopped. He was pronounced dead at 6:55 p.m. Cedric Allen Ricks was 51 years old. What do you think? Has justice been served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.